And welcome back to The Nose Plays. The Nose has finally returned from his lengthy absence. Um, I had just needed to take a break. I had some issues with some hardware again, and had some fun with the Linux challenge. Unfortunately, I didn't get as many videos out as I wanted. Um, but just a brief moment on the Linux challenge videos that I started several months ago. Um, the Linux 30-day challenge went amazingly well. In fact, it went so well that despite some hardware issues that were unrelated to Linux, I ended up having to get a new graphics card. I ended up keeping Linux as my main operating system for about 90 days, for about 3 months, and really, really enjoyed it. There was just one problem. There was a very, very small number of programs that I couldn't get to work particularly well. Um, 90% of the things that I wanted to do, games in particular, were working fantastic, but there were just a few bumps in the road. And because of that, I decided I really wanted to play those things for a while. I really wanted to use other software that wasn't available. So I jumped back into Windows, and I haven't ventured back to Linux just yet. But I fully intend to revisit Linux at some point in the future. I think the progress that it's making with gaming is amazing. But that's not why we're here today. We're here today to give you my first impression and a first look, for me at least, of Age of Wonders 4, which is a game that I have been hotly anticipating since I heard of its release, I think maybe about a year ago. Age of Wonders 4 is a game in a long line of games, a long series of games that stretch back all the way to the late 90s, where the very first Age of Wonders game was released and where I was first introduced to the series in the early 2000s when I was playing it. I've since played just about every version of the game since. There are actually several videos on my channel of Age of Wonders 3, which was a good game in its own right. But this game, oh my goodness. Um, there's a lot of people who have a lot of very positive things to say about this game, and I am one of them. This might be the very best package that you could have for playing a classic fantasy 4X strategy game. Um, there is not a game that seems to do the thing better than this one. Now, does that mean it's perfect? Absolutely not. There are a lot of things that are somewhat questionable, and there are some issues that we'll discuss as we're playing today. But this game is worth it. This game is really, really good. A lot of the issues on launch, there were a handful of bugs that were causing pretty significant crashes, frequent crashes. People were having trouble with specific graphics cards. A lot of that's been ironed out already. So if you were worried about the early reviews, I wouldn't be too concerned about it. They are coming out every week with hot fixes that are fixing these bugs one at a time, and it's just been an amazing experience. Um, we're going to talk about a lot of the little things that I've done over the last week and a half since release. I've played, I don't know, a handful of games. I've got probably 40 or 50 hours into the game already. It's a very big time sink. And that's just the tip of the iceberg for the nose right now, because there are so many great things out right now that I would really love to do some content on. But having the energy, having the time, having the hardware working has all been difficult. And I think I'm at a place where I can start doing this again. I really want to at least finish this series that I'm starting called Loyalty is Its Own Reward, in honor of the also recently returning Primarch of the Dark Angels in the Warhammer 40k universe. And so we're actually going to be playing a Dark Angels themed campaign in this game. This game is so good. It's a big open sandbox. You can create almost anything your heart desires. You'll see it's really fantastic. But let's go ahead and get into the game. We're about 5 minutes into the video and I've just talked your ear off nonstop. So first thing to know about the Dark Angels is they are from a forest world. Um, a forest world that is infested by demons. And so I went ahead and I created this realm called Caliban, which is the name of the Dark Angels planet. It's a coastal region, which means that it will be a single large Pangea-style continent with a small ocean border around part of the map edge. It is an overgrown realm, so there'll be a lot of lush vegetation and forests everywhere. Demon-infested realm. And then this is a world known for techno knights. So think King Arthur, but like with a little bit of technology, steampunky kind of technology, futuristic technology blended in. And they're all about like feudal kingdoms and lots of monster slaying. And so we've got banner lords. We're going to be able to call up feudal things. You'll see how that works. Recruitment points are pretty cool. And then the last thing is regenerating infestations, just to give us lots of stuff to kill. So every 10 turns, we're going to have new monster layers that will pop up on any territory that hasn't been claimed. So if we want an area to be safe, we have to basically take it over with cities, and you'll see how that works. But we're going to go ahead and start with Caliban. So I'm going to go ahead and select that, and then I'm going to do a fairly small game. So we'll do 4 players, normal difficulty, classic turn. And then we'll go to... Yeah, that's good. Go to factions.
Your journey starts here.
I've created a bunch of factions. We're going to go ahead and play with this one. So, Lion L. Johnson the first. And then we're going to do rulers are generated. So these are going to be randomly generated rulers. They're not going to be from the pool, I don't think, or maybe they could be both. And then let's just go ahead and get in the game. This is not a tutorial as much as it is just first impressions video, and we'll talk about some of the things that I really, really like about the game. So just a quick review of who we're playing. Lionel Johnson the first. A new ruler emerges. Explore your surrounding, expand your domain, prepare to face your rivals, and become master of this realm. Your choices will shape the new Age of Wonders. I decided to start with the Tome of Beasts, and tomes are a really big part of the game now. In previous Age of Wonders, you sort of had a couple of points that you could spend on your ruler at the very beginning of the game, and then it was pretty much locked in for the rest of the game, sort of what your path would be and who you would become. This version of Age of Wonders is very different in that you start with a few of those things, but as the game progresses, you get to pick more of them. And you can have a path in mind if you want, but it does offer you the opportunity based on your surroundings and what's going on to sort of pivot on your previous plans or come up with new exciting plans as the game progresses, which is really, really cool. So I love the way that they've redone Tomes of Magic. It's pretty awesome. We are obviously humans. We have chosen the feudal culture, and the feudal culture is an important aspect of the game. It will give some unique characteristics to your units and unique unit types. So every culture has specific variants of similar unit types. So every unit has a scout, but the scouts between the different cultures might be subtly different, have slightly different stats. And that's true for all the other unit types, which we'll discuss in detail as we play. But we're definitely a feudal. We get some bonuses with food, income. Units benefit from the stand together trait. And then there are feudal lords, which are kind of better governors, kind of, for cities. For the Dark Angels faction, I chose 2 traits. There are the classic human traits, or you can customize your traits if you'd like. I chose Resilient because Dark Angels, and particularly the Lion, are known for being resistant to the magic of chaos and the warp. They're very warp resistant, so I went ahead and chose that. So we got +3 status resistance, so status effects like mind control or any kind of thing that affects our characters will have a more difficult time actually being successful. And then Cold-Blooded sounds improper maybe, but I like the way that the trait plays off of what the Dark Angels are most known for in the tabletop of Warhammer 40k, and that is they actually have traits in the game where they're not allowed to retreat. And so minus 50% morale lost from all sources. And so morale is a big part of the game. Your units suffer in their ability to be combat effective as they lose morale. Our units don't lose morale. We stay solid throughout the fight. Um, we also get two traits to link up with our culture. There's a whole bunch of those, and I chose Fabled Hunters. Um, the Knights of Caliban and the Lion are known for hunting demonic beasts, so that's what we chose. This just gives us an extra ranged unit at the beginning, and also gives us more bonuses for clearing out infestations, which are going to constantly pop up due to the world that we built. And then we also start with slightly more experience on those units when they're produced. And then chosen uniters. The Lion is known for uniting a very large world under one rule, and so we're going to get bonuses from vassals, uniting all the kingdoms in the realm. We're also going to get some good alignment and an extra shield or polearm unit, which is pretty cool. And then we start with two spells at the beginning of the game. Our first spell is Call to Glory, which is just a buff that gives morale, and Strengthen, which just deals bonus damage. And then Mark Prey, which reduces the defenses of an enemy, a single enemy on the battlefield, making them very easy to quickly pick off. So here we are, and the very first thing that we need to do is check out our city. This is not immediately obvious. One of the few things about this game that is not immediately obvious is that you can rename your cities by simply clicking on the name. So we're going to call this the Rock. The Rock is in honor of the large, I guess you'd call it a flagship, semi-Death Starry kind of ship that the Dark Angels are known for being in possession of in the 40k lore. But I have to say, one of the things about this particular 4X experience that has been so awesome is just how intuitive and well thought out and well implemented the user interface, the UI is. Everything that you see is visually important and just bleeds tons of information into your eyeballs and brain. And you will very, very quickly, even if you're not an experienced 4X player, pick up some of these things. So everything is color coded right here. This dividing line has some meaning, which we'll talk about later on, but just every little detail. And then the other thing that I think Paradox is well known for doing this in a lot of their games. I know Crusader Kings does it, and a lot of other games do it, but um, Age of Wonders was always known for having a really good Tome of Wonder or an encyclopedia that you could pull up, but this is a new thing where you get these tooltips that pop up, right? But then everything is hyperlinked. So I can literally just dive into the tooltips almost indefinitely, and it will just keep giving me more and more information, which is so cool. Anything you want to learn more about, just take 2 seconds to start reading some of these tooltips, and you can go down really, really deep rabbit holes and learn a lot about the game. Because as long as the tooltips are well written and actually reflect what the game is doing, and that's not always the case in some of these games, but the Age of Wonders does a better job of it than most. You're going to get some really, really good information and be able to figure out things a lot easier without a dedicated tutorial. So if you're new to this series or you're new to this game, definitely spend some time playing around with the tooltips. Anytime you see these things pop up, just mouse over them and take a second to read what's going on. And you'll just greatly increase your knowledge of the game. But the first thing that we want to do is, after renaming our city, we have a level 1 village. That's how many population we have. We have 50 defenses, so these are fortification health. These basically help prevent enemies from instantly just walking in and taking our cities. And the larger this number is, the more turns you'll get to sort of set up your defenses or move your armies into position to help before a fight starts. This is our city morale. When people are happy, you get a smiley face. When they're less happy, you get a frowny face. When they're kind of neutral, you get sort of a neutral face. And so keeping an eye on this can be really important because it affects all of your outputs. Um, Population. This is new. So the way that the old games worked, it was kind of a tile-based. We're now looking at this region-based system. So each population can claim one region on the map, and different regions on the map, and I can turn this on so we can see a little better, different regions on the map are capable of producing different types of structures, and these structures will change our city output to some degree. You have a limit to how far your reach is, but you basically always have a reach of 1 for claims. So these are areas that we are claiming. And then we also have, I think it's up to 3 away, which are called distant claims. And so if I click on this, you can see I have a distant claim on it. But if I click on one that's right next, you can see that I have just a straight up claim. And that will come into play a lot more when you start interacting with other players and borders. But a pretty cool system, quite a bit different than the old system where you literally had like a couple of hex tiles and then it would grow by 1 or 2 each time you gained a population. Now you don't just grow in like a uniform way, you can grow in a direction, which is kind of interesting. Then we have our construction queues, and this is another big change to the series. I don't know if any other games have ever done this, but your construction queue for your buildings and your construction queue for your units have been separated. And we now have construction or production, which builds city structures as a resource, and then we have a new resource called draft, and this is what helps you recruit units more quickly. So if you want to recruit a lot of military forces very rapidly or replace armies, having draft is important. If you want to build structures, having production is important. And each one of these, when they're not producing anything, will produce sort of a very small amount of a side resource. So your draft will produce more food at 4 to 1. So for every 4 draft, we'll get 1 food. And then production will produce gold. So for every 4 production, we'll get 1 gold. And this only happens when we are not producing something. Now, when we want to produce something, we click on this tab, and we get all these options. We can sort them by different things if we want. But here's the thing that's really cool. You can very clearly tell what every single one of these does without ever mousing over it. And I know at various points in the game, oh man, I really need some more gold. I don't have to go through and sort of like go through the encyclopedia to figure out what buildings produce gold. I can literally just open this up, look for the building with the little gold coins, mouse over it, see, yep, it indeed produces gold, and just click on it. And that's really, really cool. So these are all of our tier 1 buildings. They're going to produce various things. Each culture is going to get some interesting unique versions of buildings that other cultures don't get. They do a very similar thing, but they're like slightly different. So for example, the Clergy Commons produces both gold and mana. I believe this is a feudal version of this building that would normally only produce mana. And so we get a just slightly different version of it that also produces gold, which is kind of cool. And you'll see that as you play the different cultures. But in order to increase the reach of our empire, like how far away we can grab territories, that's what the town hall does. It also unlocks new military units. And so that's an important building. that we're going to want to do at some point. But at the beginning of the game, I just want to go ahead and grab, we'll just go ahead and start on producing that one. We can see the little wheel here, 7 turns, pretty cool. And then we can close that. For units, having more scouts is going to be important. And these symbols right here tell me information about the units without even mousing over them. So this is a ranged unit, this is a pike unit or polearm unit, and this is a scout unit. And any unit on the battlefield or on the map that has those symbols will always have certain characteristics in common. So you can kind of get some general information about any military unit before you fight. Most military units are strong against certain other types and are weak against other types. And so there is a very rock, paper, scissory thing going on, but it's not absolute. And there are definitely some unique features within those classes of units. But let's go ahead and queue up another scout for now. Up here at the top, if we ever want to just like hurry up and get an extra unit, we can do that by paying a pretty significant amount of gold. And I'm going to go ahead and turn that off for now because I don't need to see that. So up here, this will kind of give me some information on the tiles. This actually lets me see underground because if you're new to Age of Wonders always has 2 maps that are sort of over the top of one another. We have underground territory, which there are cavern entrances that will take us down here, and certain players start down there, so we have to be wary of that. And then our research. So the way research works in this game is pretty cool. Based on your empire and your books of magic that you've selected up to this point, you sort of have a pool of just general things that can pop up for you. And every turn that you have finished a research, you'll get to choose from a selection of 3 of those things. Now, you have a couple of options. You can choose to research one, or you can choose to lock one in for a small amount of mana. And what that will do is it will keep it in the queue for the next turn. So if you have 2 spells that you really want to get, you pay a small amount of mana to lock one, and you start working on the other one. And that way, when you finish this one will definitely be in the list on your next turn. Also, if you just hate all 3 of the options, you can shuffle your research, which will redraw a new set of research skills to choose from. One thing I don't know about this is if it throws these back in the pool before it draws them. So there might be a small chance that you could draw these again. But you're very likely to get something new when you do this. So if you just hate all of these, go ahead and do this. I'm actually... Let's go ahead and let's start working on the Wild Speaker. So one way to get new unit types is through research. This is going to produce a new unit type that we'll be able to build in our cities. And now we're going to get to the actual units. So most players, when you start, you're going to start with 3 military units, but because of some of the things that we chose during character creation, I'm pretty sure we got an extra one of these and an extra one of these. So we have a slightly bigger army than a lot of people start with due to some of the choices we made. You can see that we have a support unit. That's what the symbol means, and it's a tier 2 support unit, so it's going to have a little bit higher stats than most of the tier 1 units, at least at the base level. We have 2 tier 1 polearm units. Polearm units in the feudal faction are very, very cool because they have a unique trait. They're very, very cheap for one, but they have a unique trait. And so if I pull up this character or this unit card, I can get some detailed information about it. And these symbols right here give me some pretty important information. So once you figure out what these symbols mean, you don't have to mouse over them, but the little butterfly is an evolve symbol. That's an important one to keep an eye on. What this means is that if you can level this unit all the way up to its max rank, it will become a unit of a higher tier. And so what this unit will do is after it hits max rank, it will become a level 2 or tier 2 swordsman unit, which is pretty cool. So we can basically get swordsman shield units for free just by leveling these guys up. Well, I guess it's not technically for free, but we build these guys really cheap, level them up pretty quickly after a couple of fights, as long as we can keep them alive. And then we get shield swordsman for free. This is a land movement, so this is just a shoe, and it just means that they can move over land tiles. And then this is the polearm unit designation, which gives them a few cool benefits, including first strike charge resistance, damage versus cavalry units, and large units. So these units are a counter to specific unit types. Um, we also have our normal cold-blooded trait. Feudal training is a unique trait for the feudal empire. This just means that we'll level up faster. First strike is common to polearm units, and then stand together is a really important trait that all of our feudal units, and only the feudal units, will get. And it just gives them 20% bonus damage for standing next to allies that also have this trait. So positioning is going to be really important in combat to get the most out of our units. Another big change to the original game, or Age of Wonders 3, or any of the other ones, you had to be in tile-to-tile contact to initiate fights, but that's no longer the case. So in this situation, you can see a very subtle but very noticeable red dotted line pop up when I initiate or mouse over a combat engagement. And that line will show you all of the military units that can participate in that fight. So any units that are inside that circle have the option of joining the battle. You are limited to 3 stacks, so you can include up to 3 armies, and each army stack can have up to 6 units. So at the most, any battle can start with 18 units on each side of the battlefield. However, once you're in the battle, there are ways to increase the number of units, and we'll see some of that later on. But um, I don't have to move my entire army over here to initiate this fight. I can literally just take my hero who has more movement points than the rest of my stack over here, and you'll see that I now have the option to include these other armies. Now keep in mind, if there are more than 3 armies in here, you're only going to be able to take 3. So you'll definitely want to make sure that you arrange your units into 3 stacks that you actually want to bring before you initiate a fight. Another thing that's really, really cool about this game is that it gives you this really cool auto combat feature, which actually, like, very, very high speed plays out the battle. And then, as I'll show you here in a second, it will show you the result of the battle. But you do not have to accept this result. You have 2 options from this point forward. One option you do not have any longer is to retreat from the battle to decide not to perform the battle. You do have that option on the previous screen, but on here you have 2 options. You can watch the replay, where it will actually show you in real time exactly how it got to these values using the AI. So the AI versus the AI, it came up with this result. If you think you could do better than the AI did, you can instead retry the battle, and you can retry the battle as many times as you like in some cases, which is pretty cool. So if you're just like really struggling with a difficult fight, you can play it through a couple of times until you get it right, and that's pretty neat. I'm going to go ahead and retry this because I don't really want this unit to lose that much health, and I think we can do a better job of, I mean, we outnumber these guys almost 2 to 1, 3 to 1, so let's go ahead and retry, and let's show you the combat within the game. So combat's very similar to Age of Wonders 3, but there are some very, very big changes that make it quite a bit different. It is still a tactics style game, and one of the big complaints that I've always had about Age of Wonders is that you don't get the opportunity to set up your units at the beginning of the fight. They sort of get positioned wherever. So the reason that we're sort of positioned the way we are is because of our position on that tactical map, or on that world map, I'm sorry, before we started. Um, and that's why we're spread out a little bit. But one thing to think of is the very first turn of the game is basically your opportunity to set up your formations or your positions. Different factions, different cultures are going to have different preferences for how they want to set up their units. And the feudals, because of our bonus, because of this little stand together symbol, you can kind of see it there. This little stand together symbol up in the corner of each of these guys' icon. That symbol means that we're getting a 20% buff to our damage. But if I grab a unit and I move him, that symbol will eventually go away. And so having the stand together buff is dictated by whether or not your units have that symbol or not. So this is active. So what we want to do is we want to move in such a way that we keep our buffs if possible. And notice the little stand together flag just popped up, showing that we've activated that ability again. One important thing to note is that for whatever reason, our hero does not start with our cultural trait. They can pick it up pretty early, but it's important if you're using your hero strategically with your other troops that you pay attention to whether or not that cultural trait is something you want your hero to have access to. And so it's definitely something we're going to want to pick up, because we don't activate the stand together when we stand next to people, and they don't activate it for us. And that's a pretty powerful buff, but it's still beneficial to move our units together. All right, and then we also have this guy way over here. Luckily, he has pretty high movement, so we're going to move him. And I'm going to go ahead and do a couple of things here. Actually, no, let's just go ahead and end the turn. At any point, you can go ahead and end the turn, and all of your units that haven't already activated defense mode, if they have it available, go ahead and do that. So it'll give us a little pop-up warning here. Just go yes, and everybody just activate their defenses. All right, so now it's back to our turn again. And this is where the game gets really, really tactical. Unlike a lot of other games, there are a lot of flexibility, or there is a lot of flexibility in the way that you can move units and the way that they can act and the order in which they can act. And so one thing that you have to understand in this game is how action points work. And you can tell action points of a unit by the number of little blue dots that are over their unit. Every ability in the game will consume some quantity of action points. Most of the abilities in the game will end your turn, regardless of how many action points you have left over. So that's an important thing to note. If you use an ability, your turn with that particular unit is over, even if you had extra action points available. And most of the time you will not. So, I just love this. There's so much information going on here. For example, you can see that we very clearly have 2 spear arm melee units in the front. We have 2 ranged units in the back, a support unit in the middle. This is our throne hero, our main lord. Regular heroes have a different icon. They have what's called a fighter unit. This is just a generally good melee unit. They don't specialize in anything. They're just good attackers. And then this unit is called a skirmisher unit. And it's dictated by the dagger and the arrow. They have both melee and ranged attacks. And they're also generally receive the trait called slippery, which means they can avoid attacks of opportunity or move past your units or away from your units without provoking retaliation attacks. You can also see the little sword underneath these army cards. Those are retaliation attacks, which we'll talk a little bit about. They function quite a bit differently than the old retaliation attacks, in that retaliation attacks are a separate pool of attacks that you can get through various traits. Most units that have a melee attack will get 1 retaliation attack. And using that retaliation attack does not consume your action points for the next turn, which is very different than how Age of Wonders 3 and previous versions of the game used to work. So that's something to consider if you're used to the combat tactics of the previous games. Another thing that's really cool, we have brand new casting points for combat. And the old Age of Wonders had these kinds of combat casting points as well. But this game does it a little bit differently. It's a little bit more liberal. So we start with 30 casting points. You can't cast spells on the very first turn of the game without special talents, abilities, things that you can unlock. But on the second turn of the game, you can. And so one of the reasons I positioned my guys like this was not just for the stand together bonus in case these guys charged us, but it was also to set up this spell. Now, before I cast this spell, if there's any way that I can get this guy into that last little spot there, we might. Yeah, and I can't quite get him over there. So that's okay. We'll go ahead and cast the spell. But I'm going to go ahead and cast that spell first. And that's going to give everybody a boost to their strength. And you can see the little arm. So we can see all the units that now have a strength bonus, all the units that have the stand together bonus. And then this support unit has a pretty cool ability. And so what this is going to do... Notice now we have the little arm. We also have a shield and an ankh. What this means is we get bonus defense against physical damage and against magical damage. So all my units have really, really high buffs right now. They're very, very strong, way more powerful than they were. Except for this guy, who does not have any of those buffs. But we might be able to get some of them if we get closer to the rest of the enemy. Now, I've played around with some tactics over the last week, trying to figure out what the best way to play is. And I have some thoughts on that. And generally speaking, I think if you have units with really high defense, that it's not generally worth charging in unless you can get at least 2 attacks off. So if you have to charge in to where you're only getting 1 attack off with most units, this is a bad idea because you're basically going to be doing a third of your damage potential. They're going to get a retaliation strike on you. And then on their turn, they're going to be able to take 3 attacks against you as most units can have up to 3 attacks in the game if they have all of their action points. The thing to remember is, the moment you move 1 space, you lose 1 of your action points for attacking. And then depending on your movement total, they will go down based on your movement. And so if I move 1 or 2 spaces, I get 2 attacks. If I move 3 or 4 spaces, I get 1 attack. And so that's a really important tactical thing to keep in mind. Now, if I can boost my defense high enough, then what I can do instead is sort of position my units and make it difficult for the bad guys to attack me, but force them to move and lose at least 1 of their actions. So if I move these guys right here, anybody that moves has to move at least 1 and lose an action. I can also reposition my facing. This is less important, but there are flanking attacks. So attacks to the front of my unit are going to be defended with a retaliation. Attacks to the rear of my unit, in many cases, are going to not trigger that retaliation attack, and also might lower my defenses, since I'm not paying attention. But if we move right there, and then I move this guy, say, right here, now keep in mind these guys are not connected by a unit that has the stand together trait. But you can see, because we're in guard mode, we can perform our retaliation attacks in all directions. And so that's going to make it a lot harder for the enemy to attack my units. Alright, I'm going to move my hero over here. And then we're going to move these guys up. Alright, so these guys are going to go ahead and take a shot at this. And since we moved pretty far, we're only going to get 1 little attack off, which is cool. And now that ends his turn, so he can no longer move. However, this guy can sort of move into that gap and protect him. And so figuring out the order in which you want to do things can be helpful. Now this unit can still run all the way around and attack him, which is unfortunate. Actually, maybe. Yeah, he might not be able to do that if I move here. And then go into guard mode. Yeah. The reason he can't do that is because if he comes into one of these defended tiles, it stops the rest of his movement. So moving into base-to-base contact with another enemy, especially one that's in guard mode, will prevent you from moving. Alright, now we're just going to move these archers up. Make sure they're getting their stand together bonuses. And then these guys already acted for the turn, so they can't do anything. We can get a good chunk of damage on these guys, so let's go ahead and take that shot. And they have a special ability. Let's take a look at that so you can see what just happened there. It's called displacement. Quite a few units have this, and basically anytime they get attacked, instead of doing a retaliation attack, the first attack that they receive, they just teleport to a new space randomly. So that's what that was about, but that's fine. Get a little bit of damage here. And I think that's about it for our actions this turn. Now the last thing that we're going to want to do is just press the end turn button. If there were any other actions available, you'd see the little foot here to switch between units that might still have movement points or action points. Alright, so a couple things. We were able to defend these guys, but because these guys have such a high movement, they were able to run all the way around and take a swing at these guys. The advantage of setting my units up this way, though, forced this unit to move all the way to where he only got one attack off. And so now, any units that are close to him are going to get to take multiple attacks back at him. So that was a really bad call on his part. We'll see how that plays out for him here in a second. Now, because it's the beginning of my turn, I have the option to cast spells again. And I can cast this spell again after moving some of my units and get even more buffs than I had before. Or I can cast this on this guy and make his defenses really, really low and make him a lot easier to kill, which is what I'm going to go ahead and do. Now, that's going to make him a lot easier to kill. Now, before I do anything else, I want to kind of decide which units are going to attack this guy. And typically speaking, you want to use your ranged units before your melee units, specifically when the enemies have multiple models in their unit type. And the reason for that is, as they lose health, these little models will die off, and as the units die off, damage output is reduced. And so there is a benefit to having fewer units in your unit type. For example, the hero will do full damage until he dies. My horses will do 50% damage until they lose half their health, and then they'll have a damage reduction for the last half of their health. These spearmen, because there's a lot of them, each time they take about 10-15% of their damage, they'll lose a unit, and each one of those losses will reduce the damage output for their attacks. So this is another really, really key concept to understand in this version of the game. Chip damage is often beneficial against units with lots of models. It's not very useful against heroes or against units like these hellhounds or these horsemen who don't have a lot of models, because unless you can hit one of those breakpoints, you're not going to reduce the damage. But the reason that we want to attack with these ranged units is because now we've reduced the damage of that retaliation attack by 2/3. So when we attack this guy, he's not going to get very much damage off when he does his retaliation attack. Right, so this unit's on fire. This is just a dot fire damage effect that happens. We can see from this ranged unit that if I move to different positions on the map, it will increase or decrease the accuracy of my weapon. And so I can stand here and I can take 3 shots with a 30% chance to hit, or I can move to there and take 2 shots with a 50% chance to hit. I'm going to go ahead and take the 3 shots at 30% chance, because the first hit on these guys is going to displace them, and I'm really only just trying to displace them once with this unit. I'm not trying to do a lot of damage. Even though it's showing a lot of damage, that's the maximum potential for damage that I can do. Okay, so now that they've been displaced, they don't get another displacement. And so we can move these guys. You might have noticed that when I'm mousing over some of these tiles, there's a little green exclamation point, and that's telling you that there's a terrain feature that's going to affect the unit that stands or moves through that tile. And so one of the reasons that those guys were hard to hit with my archers is because they had this obscured trait from the foliage that they were standing in. So we can take advantage of that, moving to that same tile, because these guys do have a ranged attack. And then into defensive mode. Now these guys both have the option of moving up and shooting. And that's reduced his damage a little bit. I can actually move him. Okay, so no matter what tile I move to, once I get in range, I'm only going to get one shot. So I can take one shot from 70 or one shot from 50. So we'll move up and take the 90%. And then our hero can just run in here and charge these guys. Might get lucky and get a critical hit. Not quite. Alright, so who's left? Anybody have any actions left? It looks like everybody's moved because this is done. But let's say that for some reason I made a big mistake and the battle's going terribly and I don't really want to finish it anymore. You do have the option to just restart the entire combat from the beginning, which is really nice. So anytime things are going horribly wrong, you don't have to completely finish the battle. You do also have the option to surrender. This is usually not a good idea. It will cause all of your units to basically run to the edge of the map, and there's a chance that they will basically be destroyed or be sort of routed for a few turns. They might show up after a couple of turns in the game at your home city, or they might just desert and disappear forever, which sucks. But let's go ahead and end our turn. And retaliation attack off. Perfect. Lionel Johnson's first fight. And the whole point of that fight was not just to demonstrate some of the combat that I find really, really fascinating, but also to prevent one unit from taking all that damage. One of the important things in this game that you'll learn about is how hit points and healing have been reworked, which is pretty cool. Generally speaking, in these types of games, since all units heal a little bit every single turn, it's more beneficial to sort of spread the damage over your entire army and have everybody take a little bit, and then they all heal it off much more rapidly, than have one unit tank all the damage, and then he's really weak for several turns moving forward. So, I was hoping to get a result more similar to this. These guys will heal that off pretty quickly. In fact, in one turn, if I'm not mistaken. We could retry this if we wanted to, but if we want to accept the battle, we just click that, and boom, we've got some extra money. Looks like we see another demon over here. And remember, we only moved our hero to that spot. So our hero's at pretty much full health. If we were to go fight this, we would need to move the rest of our army to at least this tile in order to participate in this fight. I'm not seeing a lot of other things that we could do. I guess there is some stuff over here. So maybe we'll take our scout. So we've met our first free city. Free cities are cities of other factions, other races. these cities can typically be vassalized. So this is also a group of Dark Angels, so they have the same racial traits as we do, which helps keep our relations high. I believe relations top out at about 800 points, so we're about halfway to the most friendly we can be with this faction. And the way that you build relations with a faction is you have to have one of these whispering stones. You give them a whispering stone, and it basically allows your faction to sort of communicate with them, kind of like a cell phone, I guess, but magical. And that communication will eventually lead to various levels of allegiance. And so we can form a pact of cooperation once we reach this threshold. We can form a pact of loyalty once we reach this threshold. And we can move into a pact of vassalage where we actually protect that city and they will work cooperatively with us, giving us a portion of their taxes and other things. So this will just slowly build up over time as long as they have one of these stones, and there are things you can do to make it go faster, but that's all we're going to do for now. Then we'll go ahead and finish our movement here. We've got a few more movement points, and you can see our first infestation. So infestations are these red bordered regions that have a monster den of some type or a monster spawning point of some type. They will slowly wake up. They're currently in sort of a dormant state, but if you leave it here for too long, it will wake up and start producing units. And then if you leave it those units for too long, they'll actually start leaving the territory and grabbing new tiles and attacking cities and things like that. And these are the things that are going to pop up about every 10 turns on tiles that haven't been claimed by anybody. So, okay. The question is, do we want our army to try to fight this turn, or do we want to wait a turn? Because my hero has full health and doesn't need the benefit of healing as much as this army does, I'm going to go ahead and send him on a little scouting expedition, and we're actually going to travel down this road, which is going to allow us to move more tiles than we normally would be able to. And also, we're going to be able to move back more tiles. So we can get back rather quickly, but we'll uncover more of the map this way. Okay, so this is our first Ancient Wonder. It's a bronze Ancient Wonder. That kind of denotes the difficulty, one skull. So it's not going to be very difficult to clear out. And it provides some bonus Imperium and research when we collect it in our empire, as well as a few other things. So this is going to add ogre units to our cities for production. So we'll be able to produce these cool ogres and collect them from Rally of Lieges, which is neat. But we have to sort of grow our empire over and grab this tile at some point if we want that to happen. That's not going to happen anytime soon, but it's good to know that it's here, and they're pretty cool. There's a whole bunch of different kinds. One thing to note about these is they're one of the few battles that you can only bring a single army stack into. So you can't have 3 army stacks like you normally can in most world map battles. All right, we're quickly approaching 1 hour, and I want to try to keep these videos to about 1 hour in length. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up this turn, and then we're going to go ahead and save the game, and I'll pick up this video maybe later tonight. I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of these over this next week to try to finish this series and show off the game a little bit and just give my first impressions of it. But my first impressions of Age of Wonders 4 is that it's absolutely amazing. It's a great sandbox game, and there are big plans to add a significant amount of content to the game over the next couple of years. That also means, on the flip side, that there's probably going to be a lot of DLC, and it's going to feel maybe a little expensive for most people's tastes. I do have some thoughts on that. I do think that that is a negative, but also a positive, and it's kind of hard to balance those things out. If you want a game to continually be developed and have more content added to it over time, and have a 7-year run like Stellaris, which is a good example of a Paradox game that's had a massive amount of DLC, but it's still going strong and it's still getting better every single year, at least in most people's opinion, you gotta pay people for their work. And I'm not against paying people for their work. It's just when those prices get a little bit of out of line. So we'll see as this game develops and see what comes with the DLC pack, how much they're offering it for, what you can get it for on sale. But one of the things that I really like about the game that I don't think they're going to take away anytime soon is the fact that it's remote play. And that means that if I buy the DLC and I host the game and I remote play it with my brother or my kids or my friends, they can all join in and they don't have to pay anything to play this game with me. And I've tested the remote play. I've had a few crashes, but they're very minor. It's literally just fire the game back up, reload the game from the last save point, and you're off and running again. And it takes like 30 seconds to get back in, and it doesn't crash very frequently. And in fact, after the last hotfix patch, I haven't had hardly any crashes. So yeah, it's perfectly great way to enjoy the game with your friends without having to get them to necessarily buy it. The advantage of that is if they really like it and they're enjoying it, then they're more inclined, they're more likely to want to say, maybe not all the DLCs for me, but I really like this game. Maybe I'll pick up just the base game when it's on sale. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to introduce a lot of people to this genre of game that they just normally wouldn't be super excited about. And this is one of the best presentations I've ever seen of a game like this, um, and really grow the number of people who enjoy these types of games. Um, so that aside, let's finish up our turn. The last thing I want to talk about is healing. The way healing in this game works is very, very different. Pretty much all healing spells in the game are temporary hit points, which is a big difference from previous games. I can cast this soothing standard spell in combat, and it will give me a temporary shield of hit points, but I lose those hit points after the battle is over. I really, really like the way that this system works. It encourages you to have healers with you pretty much at all times. You can be really aggressive, even with weak units, if you can heal them up with a shield before the fight begins in those opening turns. So even units that are low health can still be combat effective in an engagement as long as you have support units, which is what support units are supposed to be good at doing, which is awesome. But to get actual hit points, if you mouse over here, you can see that this unit's going to restore 25 hit points, and they're doing so because they're in a friendly domain. So anytime I'm within my own borders, at the end of my turn, I'm going to get a lot of hit points back. Basically, a third of my hit points back at this level with this number of hit points. And so both of these units that were just took some chip damage are going to be back to full health after one turn. Now that's a little bit different than my hero. And if we look at him, he's going to regenerate 0 health this turn. Why is he regenerating 0 health? Well, it's because he's out here in the wilderness areas. And so when you're outside of your friendly territory, you're going to get either 0 hit points if you're in a contested territory, or if you're in sort of a neutral wilderness territory, you'll get a small amount of health, like 5 health. And there are some other factors that can increase this or decrease this throughout the game. Spells that you cast on enemies will reduce their recovery rates, or hero abilities might increase your recovery rates even in the wilderness. So keep that in mind. But the big thing to note is if I'm inside this friendly territory, anywhere inside of here, these guys are going to recover. And I can move them a little bit closer
Oh.
to the next place that I want to be. But as long as I stay inside of this region, I'm going to be good for the next battle on the next turn. All right, I think that's going to wrap it up for today. So I'm going to go ahead and save the game. But if you're enjoying this series, please leave it a like. Please come back and let me know what you think of Age of Wonders 4. Leave it in the comments section below. I do respond and read all the comments at this point, so great place to interact with me if you have any questions or thoughts about things. And if you like the idea of this series, I fully intend, if you may have noticed, playing through a bunch of the Primarchs from 40k. I think it could be a lot of fun to sort of theme a faction after each of the 18 Primarchs in the game, and do a little bit of a short run for each one. So if you have some thoughts on that and would like to maybe suggest what my next playthrough should be after we finish the Lions playthrough, leave that in the comments as below as well. Until next time, this has been the Nose Plays, and you guys have a great day.